In Mark's Gospel tonight, we're following Jesus on a quite humorous jaunt around the country. Two things become clear as you read the chapter. Firstly, that Mark really has no clue at all about the geography of the Middle East. And secondly, that he's stitching together various accounts of instances in Jesus' life of his ministry. It's a montage, if you will, coming near the middle of the Gospel, and it brings with it some fairly absurd transitions if you draw them out on a map. To give it a modern twist, it is as if Jesus and his disciples hopped on a train leaving London, trying to find some peace and quiet from the crowds that were gathering all around them, and they disappeared off to the Oxfordshire countryside, only to find that the people who had been all over them had arrived before them by foot and were there awaiting them at the platform. You may think that this is not too incredulous given the current state of South West Rail. What follows that is the equivalent of saying that Jesus crossed back over London, thereby reaching Basingstoke. It makes no sense at all. It's not because Mark doesn't care about place, but rather it's because he's got his mind on only one place as he's writing this part of his gospel. The thing he cares about here is wilderness. In the authorized version, it's translated desert. And you'll have noticed that that translation leaves a little to be required. It gives us verses like this: "And they departed into a desert place by ship." Wilderness would be a better translation than desert. And I'm not saying that just to be nitpicky, but rather because within the context of Palestine, wilderness has wider connotations than simply the desert, of which there's a good deal in the Holy Land, or simply a deserted place. Wilderness isn't just a type of place, it's a concept that stretches back in the imagination of the peoples of that land. It means that which is beyond. Typically, it means beyond organized settlements, beyond the control of the government, beyond traditional civilized norms. The wilderness doesn't just have to be a desert, it could even have a river in it. Remember, John the Baptist, we're told, is out baptizing in the wilderness, and he needed no small amount of water in the River Jordan to get that done. The wilderness could even be the lake that we hear the disciples and Jesus putting out into in the story today. Almost any place beyond the immediate reach of a city or a village could qualify as wilderness. The only people you'd be likely to see in the wilderness would be the shepherds, moving their sheep from hillside to hillside to pick over whatever meagre grassy offerings were there. There's no lush vegetation in the wilderness. There's nowhere that a shepherd could allow his sheep to pasture. It's a place that provides just barely enough to survive, and so requires you to constantly be moving on to the next part and the next part. And this, rather oddly, this wilderness is a place that Jesus suggests that his disciples might find some rest. They've been remarkably successful in their evangelistic work. He sent them out to the Galilean villages, and so many followed them back from those villages to Jesus because of the teaching that they gave, that they were plagued by them, plagued by so many people to the extent that they didn't even have time to stop and eat. And Jesus' seemingly dubious solution to their tiredness and their hunger is to go out into the wilderness. Sure, this might get rid of some of the people, but it does very little to get rid of the hunger. Not to mention that the wilderness was perceived as the abode of the evil spirits, and if they weren't bad enough, the smelly shepherds and the bandits might put you off too. The wilderness was where Adam and Eve found themselves deposited when they were evicted from the Garden of Eden. The ancient Israelites had wandered for years in the wilderness, but they'd not found rest until they entered the promised land. Indeed, they needed the constant provision of manna from heaven in order to survive in the wilderness. There was no great glut of food for the hungry. The wilderness is the place where the prophets went to be tested. And sometimes in that case, it was a place of spiritual renewal, a place of searching for connection with God, but only in as much as surviving in the wilderness demonstrated that one was able to go without physical and psychological needs. One was able to cut themselves off from their food sources, even from their community, and survive in order to deepen their relationship with God. The wilderness, you'll remember, is where Jesus went at the very beginning of his ministry to be tempted by the devil. The wilderness is a place almost universally understood in a negative way. It's a windswept and a haunted place. It's a place of thirst, of hunger, of deprivation. Not the sort of place that you'd be excited to go if you were hungry and tired. When Moses was dying in the wilderness, he prayed to God that God might appoint a new leader for the people, lest they be like sheep in the wilderness without a shepherd. Of course, in the story, Joshua takes over from Moses and he leads the people into the promised land. And we hear that exact same refrain in our gospel tonight. And Jesus, it says, when he came out, saw much people and was moved with compassion toward them, because they were as sheep, not having a shepherd. Joshua's solution was a temporary one. He moved the people of Israel into the land of Canaan, where there was fertile land, where communities blossomed, but only for a while. Here, however, we have the true fulfillment of that prophecy, as Jesus, the true shepherd of the sheep, leads the people to the wilderness, and rather than trying to find something better, he transforms it. He provides them with rest in the wilderness. He teaches them about the kingdom in the wilderness. He provides them with miraculous food until they're all satisfied in the wilderness. The human shepherd has to keep their flock moving from hillside to hillside in search of softer grass. But the true shepherd of the sheep, Jesus, doesn't have to take his people anywhere. He provides all that is needed wherever he is by transforming inhospitable wilderness, the inhospitable wildernesses in which we find ourselves too, into the promised land that he's won for us. The summer holidays are now upon us, and many of us are going to be travelling, some to cities, some to the countryside. How many of us, though, are being called to the wilderness? Yes, to a place of thirst, of hunger, of deprivation, but also to a place where we can glimpse the transformative work of God. Amen.